Picture this in your head right now. You are completely alone. You are miles away from the nearest town, miles away from any other human being. You are deep in the heart of a massive forest. There is no cell phone service out here. There's no internet connection. There is no one coming to help you if you scream. You are surrounded by towering trees that block out the sun. The air is thick and smells like wet dirt and pine needles. Everything feels ancient and untouched by the modern world. And then, right in the middle of nowhere, you see something that should not be there. You see a perfectly clean set of wooden stairs just standing there in the dirt. Not attached to a house, not attached to a building, just a staircase leading up into the empty air. Would you walk up those stairs? Would you let your curiosity win? Or would you turn around and run for your life? Before I dive into this absolute nightmare of a story, before I tell you what happened to me, I need you to do me a massive favor right now. I need you to smash that like button, go ahead and hit subscribe if you are new here, turn on those notifications so you never miss a case, and drop a comment down below right this second. Tell me, what exact time is it where you are right now? Are you listening to this in the middle of the night? Are you sitting in the dark? And tell me where you are listening from in the world. I love seeing where you guys are tuning in from. I want to know who is brave enough to listen to this with me. All right, if you did all that, thank you. Now, let us get straight into the madness. Chapter 1. My name is Yasser. I have been climbing mountains for basically my entire adult life. I am not just a casual weekend hiker. I'm the guy who lives for the outdoors. I have all the professional gear, the expensive boots, the heavy-duty backpacks, the survival kits. I know how to navigate using just a compass and a map. I know how to read the weather by looking at the clouds. I know the trails in my state like the back of my hand. I know every rock, every river crossing, and every steep climb. I have spent hundreds of hours alone in the wilderness. I have seen bears, wolves, and everything in between. Nothing out there really scares me anymore. I know what to expect when I step into the wild. Nature has rules. If you respect those rules, you usually make it back home safely. But there are some things out there that do not follow the rules, things that make absolutely zero sense. And nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that Tuesday. It started out as a completely normal morning. I woke up early around 5 in the morning. I drank my coffee in silence. I packed my truck with my usual gear: water, protein bars, a first aid kit, a flashlight, and a good knife. The weather forecast said it was going to be a clear day, a little bit chilly, but perfect for a hard hike. I drove for about 2 hours to reach the state park. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon when I parked. The parking lot was completely empty. It was a weekday in the off-season. Most normal people were at work or at school. That was exactly how I liked it. I hated crowded trails. I hated hearing people playing loud music on their phones in nature. I wanted pure isolation. I wanted peace and quiet. I locked my truck and stretched my legs. I strapped my backpack on tight, and I started walking up the main trail. For the first 2 hours, the hike was boring. It was way too easy. The dirt path was wide and flat. There were clear markers on the trees. It felt like walking through a city park, not a real mountain. I was barely breaking a sweat. My legs wanted a real challenge. My brain wanted some excitement. So I made a decision that I will regret for the rest of my life. I decided to go off the trail. I stopped walking and looked into the deep woods to my right. The trees were packed closely together. There was heavy brush and tall weeds blocking the way. It looked wild and untamed. It looked perfect. I pulled out my compass to check my bearing. I memorized the direction of the main trail so I could find my way back. And then I stepped off the dirt path. I pushed through a thick wall of green bushes. Instantly, the entire atmosphere changed. The temperature dropped a few degrees. The sunlight struggled to get through the thick canopy of leaves above me. Everything became darker and greener. The sound of my boots crunching on dry leaves echoed loudly. I had to use my hands to push branches out of my face. I had to step over massive, rotting tree trunks. The ground was uneven and slippery with moss. This was exactly the kind of physical challenge I was looking for. I felt alive. I hiked like this for another solid hour, moving deeper and deeper into the unknown parts of the forest. I was completely surrounded by nature. I did not see a single piece of trash, no footprints, no signs of human life at all. I was probably the first person to walk in this specific spot in decades. I kept pushing forward, breathing heavily. The sweat was dripping down my forehead. My muscles were starting to burn in a good way. But then I noticed something strange. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Usually the forest is full of noise. You hear birds chirping up in the branches. You hear squirrels running up and down the tree trunks. You hear bugs buzzing around your ears. You hear the wind rustling the leaves. But suddenly, all of that stopped. It was like someone hit a mute button on the entire world. The silence was heavy. It felt thick, like a blanket wrapping around my head. I stopped walking and just listened. Nothing. Not a single sound except for my own heavy breathing and the pounding of my heart in my chest. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Animals only go completely silent when there is a predator nearby. When something dangerous is in the area, I slowly reached down and unclipped the knife from my belt. I held it tight in my right hand. I scanned the trees around me, looking for a bear or a mountain lion. I spun around slowly in a circle, but I did not see any animals. I did not see any movement at all. I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself down. "You are just being paranoid, man," I whispered to myself. My voice sounded weird and muffled in the dead silence. I decided to keep moving forward. I thought maybe if I just got over the next ridge, the sounds would come back. I pushed through another thick patch of tall weeds, and then the trees just suddenly cleared up. I stepped out of the heavy brush and found myself in a wide open space. It was a perfectly circular clearing in the middle of the thick forest. The grass in the clearing was short and dead, and right in the dead center of this opening, I saw it. My brain literally stopped working for a few seconds. I could not comprehend what my eyes were looking at. It was a staircase, a single flight of wooden stairs standing completely alone in the dirt. There was no house around it. There were no ruins of an old building, no concrete foundation, just dirt, grass, and these stairs. I froze in my tracks. I just stood there, staring at it from the edge of the clearing. It looked completely out of place. It looked like someone had copy and pasted it from a fancy house and dropped it right here in the wild. The wood was a rich, dark mahogany color. It looked incredibly expensive. And the craziest part, it was spotlessly clean. There were no dead leaves resting on the steps. There was no dirt or mud tracked onto the wood. There were no bird droppings. There was no water damage or rot. It looked like it had just been built and polished 5 minutes ago. But I was miles away from any road. Nobody could have carried a heavy wooden staircase out here. It made absolutely zero logical sense. Every single alarm bell in my head started ringing at the same time. My gut feeling was screaming at me to run away. My instincts were telling me that this was wrong, that this was deeply, horribly wrong. I remembered reading stories on the internet years ago, creepy forum posts about people finding stairs in the woods, park rangers sharing anonymous stories about these things. The number one rule in every single one of those stories was simple. Do not go near them, do not touch them, and whatever you do, do not ever climb them. They said bad things happen to people who climb the stairs. They said people disappear and never come back. They said time works differently around them. I always thought those stories were just stupid internet myths, just fake, scary stories written by bored kids. But looking at this impossible staircase right in front of me, those stories did not feel so fake anymore. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to hike back to my truck and drive home. I wanted to forget I ever saw this thing. But human curiosity is a very dangerous and powerful thing. It is like a disease that takes over your brain. I could not look away from it. I felt this weird pulling sensation in my chest, like a magnet was dragging me toward the center of the clearing. I told my legs to step backward, but instead, I took a step forward. Just get a closer look, my brain told me. Just see what it is made of, then leave. I slowly walked across the dead grass. My eyes were locked onto the polished wood. The closer I got, the more unnatural it felt. The air around the stairs felt heavy and cold. I stopped right at the bottom of the steps. There were about 15 steps in total, leading up to a small landing at the very top. And above that landing was just empty gray sky. I slowly reached my hand out. My fingers were shaking. I pressed my hand against the wooden handrail. It was freezing cold. It felt like touching a block of solid ice. It was way too cold for a mild autumn day. I should have stopped right there. I should have let go and ran. But I could not control myself anymore. It felt like I was watching myself from the outside, like I was a passenger in my own body. I lifted my heavy hiking boot and I placed it firmly on the first wooden step. The wood did not creak. It did not make a single sound. It felt solid, like concrete. I shifted my weight and stepped up. Then I lifted my other foot and placed it on the second step. My breathing was shallow and fast. I kept my hand tightly gripped on the freezing railing. I took the third step, then the fourth. The air kept getting colder with every step I took. It felt like the temperature was dropping by the second. I was halfway up now. I looked down at the ground. The dead grass seemed further away than it should be. I took a deep breath of the freezing air, and I kept climbing, step by step, moving closer to the top. I was not thinking clearly anymore. My mind was totally blank. All I focused on was reaching that top landing. I'd finally reached the second-to-last step. I lifted my boot one final time, and I placed both of my feet firmly on the top platform. I stood there for a split second, looking out over the tops of the trees. And then it happened. The silence was violently broken. A deafening, high-pitched ringing sound exploded inside my head. It did not come from the forest. It came from inside my own skull. It sounded like a massive jet engine screaming right next to my ear. I dropped my knife and grabbed the sides of my head. The pain was absolutely blinding. I squeezed my eyes shut and screamed, but I could not even hear my own voice over the horrible ringing. My knees instantly went weak. The entire world started to spin around me, round and round, faster and faster. My stomach did a flip. I felt nausea hit me like a truck. I tried to grab onto the railing to steady myself, but my hand slipped off the freezing wood. I felt my body falling backward, falling into the empty air. The bright gray sky above me suddenly started to dim. The edges of my vision turned dark. The ringing sound reached an impossible volume. And then, like a television being turned off, everything went completely, perfectly pitch black. I have no idea how long I was lying there in the dirt. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been 5 hours. It honestly could have been 5 days for all I knew. Time did not feel real anymore. The first thing that brought me back to reality was the pain. a deep, throbbing pain right behind my eyes. It felt like someone had hit me in the forehead with a baseball bat. I groaned out loud. The sound of my own voice startled me. My mouth was incredibly dry. It tasted like I had been chewing on old pennies and dead leaves. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt like sandpaper. I kept my eyes squeezed shut for a few more minutes. I just focused on breathing. In and out. Slow and steady. I could feel the cold, hard ground pressing against the side of my face. It did not feel like the soft, mossy forest floor I was walking on earlier. It felt like packed, dry dirt, like a baseball field that hadn't seen rain in months. I slowly opened my eyes. My vision was completely blurry. Everything was swimming in a gray, muddy soup. I blinked hard a few times, trying to force my eyes to focus. I slowly pushed myself up onto my hands and knees. My arms were shaking so violently I almost collapsed right back down. My head was pounding with every single heartbeat. It felt like my brain was trying to smash its way out of my skull. I stayed on my hands and knees for a moment, just looking at the ground, just staring at the dirt. Okay, Yazzer, I thought to myself, you just took a bad fall. You just passed out. Everything is going to be fine. I tried to convince myself that this was just a normal hiking accident. I slowly pushed myself backward and sat on the ground. I dusted the dirt off my heavy hiking pants. I reached up and touched my forehead to see if I was bleeding. There was no blood, just a cold, clammy sweat covering my skin. I took a deep breath of air to try and clear my head, and that is the exact moment that pure, unfiltered panic set in. The air felt completely wrong. It did not smell like the great outdoors anymore. Before I climbed those stairs, the forest smelled amazing. It smelled like wet pine needles, rich soil, and fresh wind. But this air smelled dead. It smelled completely stale and artificial. It smelled faintly like strong cleaning chemicals mixed with burnt plastic. It reminded me of an old hospital room that had been sealed off for years. It made my stomach turn over. I pushed myself up onto my feet. My legs felt like they were made of heavy jelly. I stumbled forward a few steps before I finally found my balance. I frantically spun around in a circle. I was looking for the wooden staircase. I was looking for the thing that did this to me. But it was gone. Completely and utterly gone. There was no trace of it anywhere. No marks in the dirt, no disturbed grass, just flat, dead dirt exactly where it used to be. It was like the stairs had just evaporated into thin air. My breathing started to speed up. I was taking fast, shallow breaths. I tried to calm myself down. Okay, just find your bearings, I said out loud. I wanted to hear my own voice to comfort myself, but the sound of my voice made things infinitely worse. It sounded flat and totally dead. In a normal forest, your voice carries. It echoes off the trees and the rocks. But here, the sound just dropped dead right out of my mouth. It was like the air itself was swallowing the noise. I looked around at the trees surrounding me. At first glance, they looked like the same exact trees from before. They had the same thick trunks. They were spaced out the same way. But as my eyes adjusted, the terrifying reality hit me. These were not normal trees. Every single tree in my line of sight was completely dead. There was not a single green leaf anywhere, not a single pine needle. The bark on the trees was a sickly pale gray color. It looked like the color of a dead body. The branches were twisted and totally bare. They looked like weird, bony fingers pointing up at the sky. And speaking of the sky, I tilted my head back and looked up. My heart literally skipped a beat. There was no sun. There were no fluffy white clouds. There was no blue sky at all. It was just a flat, glowing sheet of dull gray. It did not look like weather. It did not look like an overcast day. It looked like a massive artificial ceiling, like I was trapped inside the world's biggest warehouse, and they painted the roof gray. It was casting this weird, flat light over everything. There were no shadows. Nothing cast a shadow here. The lighting was perfectly even everywhere I looked. It made the whole forest look like a cheap video game level. It made everything look fake. And then I realized something even more terrifying. The silence. I mentioned the silence before I found the stairs, right? I thought that was quiet. I was wrong. That was just nature holding its breath. This was something entirely different. This was absolute, complete, 0 decibel silence. It was so quiet that it actually hurt my eardrums. It was a heavy, crushing pressure pushing against the sides of my head. There was no wind blowing through the dead branches. There were no birds chirping in the distance. There were no bugs buzzing around in the dirt. There was absolutely nothing. The only thing I could hear was the blood rushing through my own ears and the frantic, terrified beating of my own heart. I realized with pure, terrifying horror that I was not in my forest anymore. I was not in my state. I might not even be on my planet anymore. I had no idea what this place was, but I knew one thing for absolute certain. This was a copy, a terrifying, dead, artificial copy of the real world. My fight or flight instinct kicked into maximum overdrive. There was nothing to fight, so I definitely chose flight. I needed to get out of here. I needed to find a way back home. I picked a random direction and just started walking. I was moving fast, almost jogging. I figured if I just walked in a straight line, I would eventually hit something. A fence, a wall, a sign, a road, literally anything to prove this place had an edge. I walked for what felt like hours. I kept my eyes peeled for any change in the landscape, but the landscape never changed. It was an absolute nightmare of repetition, just endless, identical dead trees and flat, dry, dead dirt. There were no hills to climb up. There were no valleys to walk down into. There were no massive boulders to step around. There were no streams or rivers to cross. It was perfectly unnaturally flat in every direction. It was like walking on a giant treadmill designed to look like a dead forest. My legs were starting to burn incredibly badly. My boots felt like they weighed 50 pounds each. My throat was completely parched. It felt like it was coated in dust. I reached behind my back to grab my water bottle. I always kept a large metal canteen clipped to the outside of my backpack. I reached my hand back, expecting to feel the familiar nylon straps, but my hand just grabbed empty air. I stopped walking and slapped my hands against my back. Nothing. My heavy hiking backpack was gone. I instantly reached down to my belt. I always carried a heavy-duty survival knife on my right hip. It was my safety blanket in the woods. My fingers brushed against my empty belt. The knife was gone too. My pockets were completely empty. My cell phone, my keys, my compass, everything was gone. Whoever or whatever brought me to this place had stripped me of my gear. I was completely empty-handed. I was totally defenseless. I was trapped in an endless fake forest with no food, no water, and no weapons. A dark wave of absolute despair washed over me. I felt hot tears welling up in my eyes. I am a grown man, and I am not ashamed to admit that I wanted to cry. I stopped walking and leaned heavily against one of the pale, dead trees. The bark felt weirdly smooth under my hands. It did not feel like real wood. It felt like hard plastic. I slid down the trunk and sat in the dirt, putting my head in my hands. I was losing hope rapidly. I really thought I was going to die here. I thought I was going to wander around in this gray, silent hell until my body just gave out, until I died of thirst and turned to dust just like everything else in this place. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, just letting the crushing silence press down on me. I closed my eyes and pictured my wife and my kids. I pictured my house. I pictured my normal, boring, beautiful life. I was so incredibly angry at myself for going off the trail. I was so angry at myself for stepping on those stupid wooden stairs. I finally forced my eyes open. I knew sitting here feeling sorry for myself was not going to save me. I had to keep moving. I had to survive. I slowly started to push myself back up off the ground, and right as I was standing up, out of the very corner of my right eye, I saw something. It was just a slight variation in the dirt, about 30 feet away. A weird shape on the ground that did not look right. It was too straight. Nature does not make perfect straight lines, and this shape looked perfectly square. It was mostly covered by a thin layer of the dead gray dust, but the outline was definitely there. My heart did a little jump in my chest. It was the very first thing I had seen that was not a dead tree or flat dirt. I stumbled away from the tree and slowly walked over to the shape. My boots dragged in the dirt. I was exhausted, but adrenaline was starting to pump through my veins again. I stood over the square outline. I got down on my hands and knees. I started brushing the dry dirt away with my bare hands. I was digging like a crazy person. Dust was flying everywhere, getting into my eyes and my nose. Suddenly, my fingers hit something incredibly hard, and it was freezing cold. It felt just like the handrail on the wooden stairs. I kept brushing the dirt away, moving faster and faster. My breathing was heavy and ragged. Slowly, the object revealed itself. It was a heavy, solid steel trapdoor. It was embedded perfectly flat into the forest floor. It looked exactly like the entrance to an underground military bunker or an old missile silo. It had thick, heavy metal bolts holding it in place. It had massive, rusted hinges on one side, and it had a thick steel handle right in the center. I stared at it, completely confused and terrified. Why is there a high-tech bunker door out here? Who in their right mind builds an underground facility in the middle of a fake copycat forest? I kept brushing the dirt away near the handle, and I found something else. Right next to the heavy metal handle was a small black box. It was an electronic keypad. It looked incredibly modern. It had a small screen and numbers from 0 to 9. There was a tiny red light glowing softly at the top of the keypad. It was the only color I had seen since I woke up in this gray hell. I stared at the keypad. I did not know the code. I had no idea how to get this thing open. I was about to just start kicking the door in for frustration. But then I reached out with a shaking hand. I do not know why I did it. It was just pure, desperate instinct. I pressed my dirty index finger against the enter button on the keypad. To my absolute, total shock, the little red light instantly turned bright green. Beep! A sharp electronic chirp broke the crushing silence of the forest. It was so loud it made me jump backward. Then I heard a loud, heavy mechanical clank. It sounded like a massive iron vault unlocking. The heavy locking mechanism had just disengaged on its own. The door was unlocked. It was waiting for me. I sat there, on my knees, staring at the green light. My brain was screaming at me again. Do not open that door. Do not go down there. Whatever built this fake forest is down there. But what other choice did I have? Stay up here and die of thirst? Wait for whatever took my gear to come back and finish me off? I had absolutely no other options. If I wanted to survive, if I wanted to see my family again, I had to find out what was going on. I crawled closer to the heavy steel handle. I grabbed it with both of my hands. The metal was so cold it almost burned my skin. I planted my heavy boots firmly on the dirt ground for leverage. I took a deep breath, braced my core, and pulled upward with every single ounce of strength I had left in my entire body. The heavy steel door groaned in protest. The rusty hinges shrieked loudly as it slowly started to swing open. As soon as the seal was broken, a freezing blast of air hit me right in the face. It smelled even worse than the air up top. It smelled like bleach, strong chemicals, and old stagnant water. I pushed the heavy door all the way back until it hit the dirt with a heavy thud. I leaned over the edge and looked down into the hole. It was pitch black. It was like staring into the mouth of a monster. I could not see the bottom. I could only see the first few rungs of a rusty metal ladder attached to a smooth concrete wall. It led straight down into total suffocating darkness. I had absolutely no idea what was waiting for me down there in the dark. I did not know if it was an experimental lab, a prison, or something much, much worse. My heart was beating so fast I felt dizzy. I took one last look around at the dead, gray, silent forest. I hated that place. I would rather face whatever was down there than die up here in the gray nothingness. I took a deep breath of the foul, chemical air. I swung my legs over the cold, concrete edge. I grabbed the top rung of the rusty ladder, and I started to climb down into the dark. I gripped the freezing cold metal of the ladder. My knuckles were turning completely white. I took one final look up at the gray, glowing, artificial sky. Then I started to climb down. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of my heavy hiking boots hitting the metal rungs echoed loudly. The sound bounced off the smooth concrete wall surrounding me. It sounded like I was climbing down the inside of a massive chimney. With every step I took downward, the air got colder and the darkness got thicker. The faint gray light from the trapdoor above me started to fade away. Soon, I was completely engulfed in pitch black darkness. I could not even see my own hands gripping the ladder right in front of my face. I just had to feel my way down, blindly placing one foot below the other. My breathing was shallow and fast. The smell of harsh cleaning chemicals was getting much stronger now. It was burning the inside of my nose. It smelled like bleach mixed with something rotten, like a hospital that had been hiding a terrible secret. I kept climbing down for what felt like an eternity. My arms and legs were burning from exhaustion. I was terrified that the ladder was just going to suddenly end. I imagined my foot stepping into empty space and falling into a bottomless pit. But finally, my right boot hit something solid. It did not make a metallic clang. It made a dull, heavy thud. I lowered my left foot and stood firmly on a flat surface. I had reached the bottom. I let go of the rusty ladder and stood completely still in the total darkness. I held my breath and just listened. I expected to hear monsters. I expected to hear guards yelling at me, but it was totally quiet. Except it was not the dead, crushing silence of the fake forest up above. This silence had a texture to it. It was mechanical. I could hear the very faint, low-frequency hum of heavy machinery working somewhere far away. I could hear a slow, steady dripping sound. Drop, drop, drop. Water hitting a concrete floor. I reached my hands out in front of me like a blind man. I took a slow, careful step forward, then another step. Suddenly, a loud, sharp clicking noise echoed through the dark space. Click. Instantly, a row of bright fluorescent lights flickered to life directly above my head. The light was blinding. I squeezed my eyes shut and threw my hands up to cover my face. The sudden brightness actually sent a sharp spike of pain right through my skull. I slowly opened my eyes, squinting against the harsh glare. The lights were buzzing loudly, flickering a little bit. I lowered my hands and looked around at my new surroundings. I was standing at the end of a long, incredibly sterile hallway. It looked completely out of place. It did not belong under a forest. The floor was made of shiny, perfectly clean white tiles. The walls were made of thick, smooth white concrete. There were no windows anywhere. It looked exactly like the basement level of a high-tech medical facility or a secret military research lab. The hallway stretched out straight ahead of me for a long time. It was lined with heavy, solid metal doors on both sides. Every single door had a small rectangular window made of thick, reinforced glass. And next to every door was a small electronic keypad, just like the one on the trapdoor outside. I stood there, frozen in place. My brain was trying to process what I was looking at. This was not magic. This was not some supernatural monster in the woods. This was built by humans. This was a multi-million-dollar underground facility, and it was hidden right underneath a thick copycat forest. But why? What were they hiding down here? I had to find out. I had to know what the stairs were actually for. I started walking slowly down the center of the white hallway. My heavy boots squeaked against the clean tiles. The sound seemed way too loud. I felt totally exposed. There was nowhere to hide down here. If a guard walked around the corner right now, I was completely dead. I crept up to the very first metal door on my right side. The door had a small metal plaque bolted to the front. It read, "Test Subject Observation, Room 101. Test Subject. The words made a cold shiver run all the way down my spine. I slowly leaned forward and pressed my face against the thick glass window. I cupped my hands around my eyes to block out the glare from the hallway lights. I looked inside the room. The room inside was completely dark, except for a faint, eerie blue glow coming from the center. Right in the middle of the room was a massive, cylindrical tank. It was huge, easily 8 feet tall and 6 feet wide. It was made of thick glass and reinforced steel. The tank was completely filled with a thick, milky liquid. It looked like dirty water mixed with chalk. Thick black tubes and cables were running from the ceiling directly into the top of the tank. There were heavy monitors and computer screens attached to the side, blinking with green data. But that is not what terrified me. What terrified me was the dark shadow floating suspended in the middle of the milky liquid. I squinted my eyes, trying to focus through the thick glass of the window. The shadow was roughly the size of a human being. Suddenly, the milky water shifted slightly inside the tank, and the shadow bumped against the front glass. My heart completely stopped in my chest. I let out a quiet gasp and stumbled backward away from the door. It was a person. There was a human being floating completely naked inside that tank. They were wearing some kind of dark, heavy helmet that covered their entire head. Thick breathing tubes were connected to the mouth area of the helmet. Wires were taped all over their chest and arms. They were completely motionless, suspended in the liquid, totally cut off from the outside world. Total sensory deprivation. My breathing became incredibly fast and ragged. I started practically running down the hallway, looking into every single window I passed. Room 102, another tank, another body floating in the dark. Room 103, same thing. Room 104, empty tank. Room 105, another person floating in the milky water. There were dozens of these rooms, dozens of people. They were keeping them locked inside these sensory deprivation tanks. They were taking away their sight, their hearing, their sense of touch. They were locking their minds inside a dark, empty void. It is considered one of the worst forms of psychological torture in human history. If you leave someone in total sensory deprivation for too long, their brain breaks. Their mind starts to invent things to fill the empty space, and they start to hallucinate. Terrible, hyper-realistic nightmares that they cannot wake up from. And then, the horrible realization hit me like a physical punch to the gut. The stairs in the woods. The perfectly clean wooden staircase that made absolutely no sense. It was not a ghost story, it was a trap. It was a brilliantly designed, perfectly camouflaged trap. They put it out there in the deepest parts of the national park, miles away from normal trails where only experienced hikers and explorers would go. People who were completely alone, people who would not be missed for days or even weeks. They rely on human curiosity. They know that if someone finds a clean staircase in the middle of a dirty forest, they will touch it, they will try to climb it. And the second you step on that top platform, whatever technology they hid inside the stairs knocks you unconscious. Maybe a massive sonic frequency or some kind of chemical spray. And then, while you are blacked out, their security team comes up from the bunker. They grab your unconscious body, they strip you of your gear, your ID, your entire life, and they drag you down here into the dark. They plug you into one of these nightmare tanks to run their twisted psychological experiments. But what about the fake forest? What about the dead, gray world I woke up in? Was that an artificial testing area they built underground? Or was that a hallucination caused by the tanks? Maybe my brain was already breaking. Maybe I was already plugged into a tank right now, and this whole escape was just a dream. I slapped myself hard across the face. The sting of pain felt real. The cold concrete under my boots felt real. I had to believe this was real, or I was going to lose my mind completely. I reached the very end of the long hallway. There was a set of heavy, double-glass doors with a sign above them that read, "Central Control." The doors were slightly propped open. I peeked around the corner, holding my breath. The room was huge, filled with rows of computer servers and massive monitors. The monitors were displaying live camera feeds from inside the sensory deprivation tanks. Rows and rows of floating bodies, their vitals flashing in green numbers. There was a large metal desk in the center of the room. Nobody was sitting in the chair. The room was completely empty. I quickly slipped inside the control room. I walked over to the main desk. There were thick manila folders and loose papers scattered all over the place. I grabbed the first folder I saw and opened it up. It was a medical file. There was a photo of a young guy, maybe 25 years old, smiling. Next to his photo was a stamped label, Subject 84, acquired via Decoy 3 stairs. My hands were shaking so violently I almost dropped the file. I read the notes typed below his picture. Subject has been in total isolation for 400 hours. Auditory and visual hallucinations are extreme. Subject's brain scans show complete inability to distinguish reality from simulated nightmare. Subject firmly believes his family has been replaced by faceless entities. Experiment deemed a massive success. Prepare for disposal. I felt bile rise up in the back of my throat. Disposal. When they were done breaking your mind, they just killed you. They threw you away like actual garbage. They were monsters. Absolute soulless monsters wearing white lab coats. I frantically searched the desk, looking for anything that could help me. A map of the facility, a weapon, a key card to unlock the exit doors. My eyes locked on to a large red emergency button set into the control panel. The label underneath it said, Surface Hatch Release. That was it. That was my way out. I reached out to press the heavy red button, but right before my fingers touched the plastic, a sharp electronic voice echoed from the speakers mounted on the ceiling. Warning, unauthorized access detected in Sector 4. Surface hatch breached. Warning, test subject loose in Sector 4 hallway. They knew I was here. They found the broken trapdoor outside. Instantly, all the bright white fluorescent lights in the room clicked off, and flashing blood-red emergency lights turned on. The entire control room was bathed in a pulsing, terrifying red glow. A massive, incredibly loud alarm siren started blaring through the whole facility. Wee-oo, wee-oo, wee-oo. It was deafening. It rattled my teeth and my skull. I dropped the medical file on the desk. I spun around to face the double glass doors, and through the thick glass, I saw them. At the far end of the hallway, by the ladder I just climbed down, 3 heavy black steel doors burst open. A team of huge men wearing heavy black tactical gear swarmed out into the hallway. They were wearing black gas masks and holding matte black assault rifles. They looked like a professional military hit squad. And they were looking right down the hallway, straight at me. One of them pointed a heavily gloved finger directly at the control room windows. There, in the control room. Do not let him reach the main elevator. His muffled voice echoed down the hall over the blaring sirens. I was completely trapped underground, with no weapons, no way to fight back, and a heavily armed death squad sprinting straight toward me. My heart felt like it was going to explode right out of my chest. The heavy thud of their combat boots hitting the floor tiles echoed loudly. There were at least 5 of them, massive guys in heavy black body armor. They looked like a professional tactical strike team, and they were sprinting straight down the hallway toward the control room, toward me. The blaring red emergency lights were flashing, making everything look like a nightmare. The siren was screaming so loud my ears were physically ringing. "Target is in the main control center," one of the guards yelled. His voice was muffled and robotic through his black gas mask. "Secure the perimeter and lock down all elevators." I was completely and utterly trapped. I had no gun, no knife, nothing. I was just a guy in hiking boots and a dirty t-shirt. I backed away from the thick glass windows of the control room. My mind was racing 1,000,000 miles an hour. I needed an exit right now. I turned back to the massive metal desk in the center of the room. The big red emergency button was still sitting there, the one labeled Surface Hatch Release. I did not know what it would do. I did not know if it would open a door for me or just seal the room entirely. But I had absolutely 0 options left. I slammed my fist down onto the red plastic button as hard as I could. A loud electronic buzzer sounded over the screaming siren. Buzz! Suddenly, the heavy double glass doors of the control room slammed shut. I heard the loud click of heavy magnetic locks engaging. The guards reached the doors just a second later. They grabbed the handles and pulled, but the doors did not budge an inch. They were locked out, but that also meant I was locked in. One of the guards slammed his heavy assault rifle against the glass. The reinforced glass cracked, but it did not shatter completely. He took a step back and raised his weapon. He pointed the barrel right at my chest. "Get down on the ground right now!" he screamed through the glass. I did not listen. I spun around and frantically searched the back wall of the control room. Behind the massive rows of computer servers, there was a small metal grate. It was an air ventilation shaft set low into the wall near the floor. It was small, maybe 2 feet wide, but it was my only chance. I heard the deafening sound of automatic gunfire erupt behind me. Bang! 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 The guard was shooting out the thick glass doors. Tiny pieces of sharp glass exploded across the room like shrapnel. I felt a sharp sting on my left cheek as a piece of glass sliced my skin. I dove behind the heavy metal servers just as more bullets tore through the room. They were destroying the computer monitors and shredding paperwork. Sparks were flying everywhere as the bullets hit the electrical equipment. I crawled on my stomach toward the metal grate. I grabbed the edges of the metal cover with my bare hands. I pulled and twisted with every ounce of adrenaline in my body. The rusty screws popped out of the concrete wall with a loud snap. I ripped the cover off and threw it aside. I squeezed my shoulders and head into the dark, narrow metal tunnel. The guards kicked the rest of the broken glass out of their way. I could hear their heavy boots stepping into the control room. "Spread out! Find him! He is hiding behind the servers." I pulled my legs into the vent just as one of the guards walked around the corner. He shined a bright flashlight under the desks. I held my breath and froze. If he pointed that flashlight down here, he would see me instantly. I slowly, silently pushed myself deeper into the dark metal shaft. The metal was cold and covered in a thick layer of greasy dust. It smelled like old oil and burnt wires. It was incredibly tight. The metal walls were pressing tightly against my shoulders and my back. If I got stuck down here, I would die. I crawled forward on my elbows and knees, moving as fast as I possibly could in the dark. I crawled for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 10 minutes. The vent twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the walls of the underground facility. Below me, I could hear the faint sounds of the guards searching. They were opening doors and yelling at each other over their radios. They were tearing the place apart looking for me. Suddenly, the metal tunnel started to angle straight up. It was turning into a vertical ventilation shaft. I looked up into the darkness. I could see a very faint, pale gray light shining far above me. The surface, the fake, dead forest. It was my only way out. I wedged my back against one side of the metal shaft. I pressed my boots against the opposite side, and I started to push myself up, inch by painful inch. It was absolutely agonizing work. My leg muscles were screaming in pain. My arms were shaking so violently I could barely hold myself up. Every time I pushed up, the metal groaned loudly. I was terrified the noise was going to give away my position. I climbed up into the darkness for what felt like an eternity. Sweat was pouring down my face, stinging my eyes. My lungs burned with every breath of the stale, dusty air. Finally, my head bumped into something solid. It was another metal grate, exactly like the one I crawled through. The gray light was shining right through the slits. I pushed up on the grate with both of my hands. It was heavy, but it was not locked. I pushed it completely out of the way. I grabbed the ledge and pulled my exhausted body out of the shaft. I collapsed onto the flat, dry dirt, gasping for air. I was back. I was back in the terrifying, dead, gray copy of the forest. The pale, gray sky was still glowing with that artificial, flat light. The dead trees were still pointing up at the ceiling. It was still dead silent. But right now, that fake forest looked like heaven compared to the nightmare lab below. I slowly pushed myself up off the ground. My entire body ached. My hands were covered in grease and dried blood from crawling. I needed to find the stairs. That was the only way this made sense. If the stairs transported me into this fake world, then climbing the stairs again had to transport me back out to the real world. It was the portal mechanism. I started running through the dead trees. I did not care about the pain in my legs anymore. I was running on pure, terrified survival instinct. I ran and ran, scanning the endless, identical dead trees. But everything looked exactly the same. There were no landmarks, no paths, just flat dirt and pale bark. I was starting to panic again. What if the stairs moved? What if they were turned off? What if I was trapped in this gray hell forever? Suddenly, I heard a loud, violent sound echo through the silent forest behind me. Crash! It was the sound of heavy metal slamming against dirt. I spun around while still running. About 100 yards behind me, another heavy steel trapdoor had been thrown open. 3 of the massive tactical guards were climbing out of the ground. They had followed me up to the surface. One of them pointed his black assault rifle directly at me. "There he is. Do not let him reach the extraction point," he yelled. The sound of his voice ripped through the dead silence of the forest. I turned back around and sprinted harder than I have ever sprinted in my entire life. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I heard the sharp, terrifying crack of a rifle firing. Crack! A bullet whizzed right past my left ear. It hit a dead tree right in front of me, exploding the pale bark into a million pieces. I ducked my head and started running in a zigzag pattern to make myself a harder target. Crack! 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 Dirt kicked up all around my boots as bullets slammed into the ground. They were trying to kill me. They could not let a test subject escape with their secrets. My lungs felt like they were bleeding. I was losing speed. I could hear their heavy boots crunching on the dirt behind me. They were gaining on me fast. "Stop running. You have nowhere to go," one of them screamed. I burst through a thick patch of dead gray bushes, and there it was, right in the middle of a small clearing, the perfect, clean wooden staircase. It looked exactly like it did in the real world. The dark mahogany wood was shining softly in the flat gray light. It was standing completely alone, leading up to nowhere. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I was about 50 feet away from it. I pushed my legs to their absolute breaking point. I heard the guards break through the bushes behind me. "He is going for the stairs. Take him out." I heard the terrifying, mechanical click of the rifles reloading. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop to grab the handrail. I just threw my entire body forward. I took a flying leap into the air. I heard a massive volley of gunfire erupt behind me, just as my heavy hiking boots slammed down hard onto the first wooden step. Instantly, that same deafening, high-pitched ringing sound exploded inside my skull. It sounded like a massive jet engine screaming right next to my ear. The flat gray sky above me suddenly collapsed into total darkness. The sound of the gunfire vanished. The pain vanished, and my entire world faded to black. I woke up gasping for air. My eyes shot wide open, staring straight up at the sky. But it was not that dead, flat, glowing gray ceiling anymore. It was a beautiful, brilliant, piercing blue sky. Bright, golden sunlight was shining down through the branches, hitting my face. And I could hear things. Beautiful, glorious, normal things. I heard the wind rustling through the green leaves high above me. I heard a flock of birds chirping and singing in the distance. I heard the tiny, normal buzzing of insects flying around in the tall grass. I was back. I was actually back in the real world. I rolled over onto my side and coughed hard, spitting dirt out of my mouth. Every single muscle in my body felt like it had been hit by a freight train. My knees were bruised and bleeding. My hands were still covered in black grease and dirt from the ventilation shaft. I slowly, painfully pushed myself up off the ground. I stood on my shaking legs and frantically spun around in a circle. I was standing right in the middle of that same small clearing, but there was nothing there. The perfectly clean, polished wooden staircase was completely gone. There was no trace of it, no burn marks, no nothing. It was like it had never existed in the first place. I looked out at my clothes. My heavy hiking backpack was still gone. My survival knife was still missing from my belt. The only things I had left were the clothes on my back and my hiking boots. That was the absolute proof I needed. It was not a dream. I did not just hit my head and hallucinate the whole thing. They actually took me. They took me down into that underground nightmare, and I somehow made it out alive. I did not waste another second standing around. I turned around and started power walking back toward the main trail. I used the position of the sun to figure out which direction my truck was in. I was moving as fast as my injured legs would carry me. Every time a branch snapped in the distance, I flinched. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see massive men in black tactical gear hunting me down. I expected to hear the terrifying crack of an assault rifle echoing through the real forest, but nothing happened. I hiked for over an hour, pushing through the thick brush. Finally, I saw the familiar brown dirt of the main hiking path. I stumbled out onto the trail and almost fell to my knees in relief. I followed the trail all the way back to the state park parking lot. My truck was exactly where I left it. It looked completely untouched. I ran up to the driver's side door and grabbed the handle. But it was locked, and my keys were inside my missing backpack. I didn't even think twice. I walked over to the edge of the parking lot and found a massive, heavy rock. I picked it up, walked back to my truck, and smashed the driver's side window. Glass shattered everywhere, covering the front seat. I reached in, unlocked the door, and brushed the broken glass off the leather. I kept a spare ignition key hidden inside the center console for emergencies. I ripped the console open, found the small silver key, and jammed it into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I threw the truck into reverse, backed out of the space, and slammed my foot on the gas. I drove out of that state park like a complete madman. I was pushing 80 miles an hour down the winding dirt roads. Dust was flying up behind me in a massive cloud. I kept checking my rearview mirror every 10 seconds. I was terrified that a black SUV was going to suddenly appear behind me. I drove for 2 straight hours without stopping. I did not go to the police station. What was I going to tell them? Hey, I found magic stairs in the woods that teleported me to a fake forest. Hey, there's a secret underground laboratory performing illegal sensory deprivation torture on hikers. They would never believe me. They would think I was on drugs. They would probably lock me up in a psychiatric ward. And if I made a big public scene, whoever built that facility would definitely come find me. They knew who I was. They had my backpack, my wallet, and my driver's license. They knew exactly where I lived. The only thing I wanted in the entire world right now was to see my family. I just wanted to hold my wife and my 2 kids. I wanted to lock the doors to my house, close all the blinds, and never go into the woods again. I finally reached my neighborhood. It was a normal, quiet, sunny afternoon in the suburbs. People were walking their dogs. Kids were riding their bicycles on the sidewalks. It felt like an entirely different universe compared to the horrors I just escaped. I pulled my truck into my driveway and slammed it into park. I did not even bother turning the engine off. I threw the door open, practically fell out of the truck, and ran up the front steps. I pounded my fist against the front door. "Honey, open the door! It's me!" I yelled. My voice was cracking, completely filled with raw emotion. I heard the deadbolt click and the door swung open. The smell of home instantly washed over me. The smell of vanilla candles and fresh laundry. I stepped inside the hallway, my heart soaring with pure joy. "Yasser, oh my God, what happened to you?" My wife's voice called out from the kitchen. "You are covered in dirt and blood." I heard the fast, heavy footsteps of my 2 kids running down the wooden stairs. "Daddy! Daddy's home!" they yelled together. I broke down completely. Hot tears streamed down my dirty cheeks. I fell to my knees right there on the hardwood floor of the entryway. I threw my arms open wide to catch them. I just wanted to hug them and never ever let go. "I missed you guys so much," I sobbed, looking down at the floor. "I thought I was never going to see you again." My wife walked out of the kitchen and stood right in front of me. My kids ran up and wrapped their little arms around my neck. It felt so warm. It felt so real. I slowly wiped the tears from my eyes and looked up at my beautiful family. And in that exact moment, my entire reality shattered into a million pieces. My blood turned to absolute ice in my veins. My breath caught in my throat. I was looking directly at my wife's face. But she didn't have a face. Where her beautiful brown eyes should have been, there was just smooth, blank, fleshy skin. Where her nose should have been, there was nothing. Where her mouth should have been, there was just flat, pale flesh. She was completely and utterly faceless, like a terrifying, unfinished mannequin made out of human skin. I let out a sound that wasn't even human, a choked, horrified gasp. I violently pushed myself backward, scrambling across the floor away from them. I looked at my 2 kids. They were exactly the same. No eyes, no mouths, no noses, just terrifying, blank slabs of flesh staring right at me. "Why are you crying, honey?" My wife's voice echoed in the hallway. But her face didn't move. There was no mouth to move. The voice just seemed to project from the empty space around her head. "We missed you, Daddy," the kids said in perfect unison. Their voices sounded hollow, like a cheap recording playing from a broken speaker. I slammed my back against the front door. I grabbed my own hair and pulled as hard as I could, screaming in absolute terror. This wasn't my family. These were fake, terrifying copies. And then, the darkest, most horrifying realization slowly crept into my mind. The air in my house suddenly smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals. The sunlight coming through the window looked a little too gray, a little too flat. I never escaped, did I? I never actually made it out of the facility. I never climbed back up the vent, and I never jumped onto those stairs. I am still down there in the dark. I am still locked inside one of those massive glass tanks, floating completely naked in the cold, milky water, wearing a heavy black helmet over my head. They broke my mind completely, and now I am going to be trapped inside this hyper-realistic nightmare for the rest of my life, and there is absolutely no way to wake up. All right, guys, that is the end of this insane case. I really hope you enjoyed the story of the endless stairs. If this story gave you the chills, you know exactly what to do. Hit that like button right now to help the algorithm. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any future uploads. Share this with a friend who loves exploring the woods. And let me know in the comments, what would you have done if you found those stairs? Thank you all so much for listening and supporting the channel. I will see you all in the next case. Stay safe out there. Peace.